The Dialogues of Plato, the Crito. The Crito is one of the early dialogues of Plato. It's probably the second one, immediately following the Apology of Socrates. And not only does it follow it chronologically, it follows it from the point of view of the story that it tells. The Apologia of Socrates represents the speech of Socrates in his own defense in the Athenian court, where he was accused of impiety, of asebeia. And we get, in that dialogue, we get Socrates' speeches, his counter speech after he has been sentenced or condemned, and then his last words to the judges. Now, after those episodes, Socrates has been condemned to death by the Athenian democracy, and he is not executed immediately, as would have been the case in other circumstances, but because his trial was coincidental with a religious festivity, Socrates is taken to jail, and he is kept there for a few weeks. I think it was 4 weeks, until the Delian ship returns from the sanctuary of Apollo in Delos. And after the ship has come back, the time for his execution has come. So the Crito starts a couple of days before the ship arrives. And the scene we have here is a painting, a drawing of the cell in which Socrates was imprisoned during these few days, during these few weeks. As I said, Crito is one of the first dialogues. It forms part of a family with a series of 3 other Platonic dialogues that altogether conform what could be called the Passion of Socrates according to Plato. The Euthyphro would be the first one of these, in which Socrates is going to his trial but still has time to chat with a person along the way. Then would come the Apologia with Socrates' trial. Then would come the Crito with Socrates' imprisonment and Crito's attempt at convincing him to run away. And finally, we would have the Phaedo, which is the latest of all of these. It's believed to be a middle Platonic dialogue, which is about the death of Socrates and his last speculations about the immortality of the soul. So we were saying, in this dialogue, we are confronted with Socrates' impending death. The first part of the dialogue is a relatively narrative prologue in which, when the story begins, we have Socrates waking up. He's in jail, he was sleeping, he wakes up, it's early morning, and he sees a friend of his, Crito, by his side. Now, this Crito was not exactly a disciple of Socrates, as far as we know. He was a friend from childhood, a neighbor from the same district as Socrates, Alopeke. They were both from the same demos. And from the tradition, from this text and from other texts, we get the impression that Crito was not really a very intellectual sort of person. He just valued Socrates as an individual. He didn't care too much about his philosophy or his aspect as a sage. Crito was a rather successful man. He made a lot of money as a merchant. And a friend, a close and practical-minded friend of Socrates, but not too interested in philosophy, perhaps. So when the scene starts, Crito has come, and Socrates is a bit startled by seeing Crito so early. And from what Crito answers, we sort of get to understand that he has bribed the guard to be allowed to enter the cell early on. And he says that he is bringing, first he mentions how surprised he is at the placidity with which Socrates sleeps. And then he says that, he has to bring some bad news. In Cape Sunion, the Delian ship has been sighted, so probably tomorrow will be Socrates' last day. Now, Socrates explains that he has just woken up from the most delightful dream in which he saw this lovely heavenly maiden who told him that In 3 days, Socrates, you will depart for the beautiful lands of Scythia. So Socrates says, I don't think it will arrive tomorrow, the ship. Based on this dream, on this prophetic dream I've had, probably 3 days until my death. So, based on this impending execution which is about to fall upon Socrates, Crito tries to persuade his friend to escape. And he will do it in the further dialogue. The dialogue is quite short, by the way. In the edition I have, it's only 6 pages. But in his first suggestion, he basically makes 2 points to try to persuade Socrates to run away, which are pretty narcissistic points because they're all centered on Crito himself. So he says, first of all, you should escape because I don't want to lose a good friend as you are. A friend as good as you are. I don't want to lose you. And the second argument is, if you were to die, me and the others will get a terrible reputation. People will say that we were too stingy to spend money on saving your life when it would have been perfectly possible. Now, after this, we get the start of the dialogue proper, which is the first interchange between Crito and Socrates, debating or considering the possibility or the desirability of escaping from jail, of fleeing from Athens and from the death sentence that has been heaped upon Socrates. So this is the first exchange is relatively brief, and basically Socrates says the following when he's confronted with suggestions for running away and for being afraid of his execution. He says, first of all, most important thing, one shouldn't care about the opinions of the many. So he's answering here Crito's statement that people will think we didn't help you because we preferred our money. He says, never should one fret about the opinions of the many. One should only think of the opinions of the wise, of the good, of the learned, of the ones who know. And the second argument is that, the second argument that makes itself implicitly felt here, or explicitly, is that death isn't something that Socrates fears and isn't something that men should fear. He says, death isn't necessarily an evil. We don't know if death is an evil or not. And anyway, Socrates is old. When at the time of his trial and sentencing, he was, I think, in his late 60s at least. So, a very ripe old age for a Greek of the classical period. And he is saying that anyway, death is going to come to him quite soon, whether he is executed or not. Now, the two arguments are very briefly presented, but they present a very, very interesting series of reverberations. So the first idea, that one shouldn't care about the opinions of the many, is hammered throughout the dialogue. It's probably, along with the question of justice, Δικαιοσύνη would be the key word for this dialogue, to synthesize it. It's a dialogue about justice, Δικαιοσύνη, but it's also a dialogue about the respect, the value of the wise opinions, of the opinions based on knowledge, on real knowledge, on, in this case, on a real understanding of what is just, rather than on the opinions of the majority. Now, this sounds slightly anti-democratic, and, Athens at this time was a democracy. A majority had sentenced Socrates to death. Some historians say that the real reason for Socrates' execution was that he was felt to be close to the aristocratic party. Some of his disciples or followers were prominent oligarchs and aristocrats, people who rejected the democracy and who had fought violently against it, installing different forms of aristocratic governments shortly before the time of Socrates' trial, the last one, the 30 Tyrants. So one feels an anti-democratic streak, although even we who live in a democratic society would probably share the idea that opinions don't become better or better sustained or more worthy of praise just because they're held by a majority. But, at least there is a problematization of democracy, or of some views or forms of democracy, in what Socrates is saying. Death isn't necessarily an evil. This is a topic that is already present in the previous dialogue, in the Apologia. Socrates is not too explicit about what might happen after death. In fact, he's pretty evasive there. He says, maybe we sleep forever, maybe we go to a better place. Here he seems a little bit more optimistic about life after death. And in the continuation dialogue, you could say, the Phaedo, he continues with this topic with some expostulations on the immortality of the soul. So Socrates says, don't worry about what other people will say. The opinions of the good are the worthy ones, not the opinions of the many, and death is not to be feared. What's Crito's answer to these points? Well, he makes two. Basically, first, in this he shows he's a very pragmatic sort of man. The majority can kill you, Socrates. This is, in fact, what has just happened. Majority opinions must be paid some sort of attention because, they have the consequence of harming you. Although Socrates will try to evade this argument by saying that he, as we just said, he doesn't consider death as an evil, as the worst of evils, not in the least. He thinks the majority has no power to impose real evil or real good on him, which would be making a person wise or making him foolish. And the second argument that Crito makes is four arguments for escaping, which are a bit more solid than the ones he presented before. One is the same, but the others are more persuasive and more focused, perhaps, on Socrates than on Crito's needs. So the first thing is low cost. He says, Socrates, maybe the reason you don't want to run away is that you think that if we help you to escape, we, your friends who helped you, will suffer from banishment or execution or heavy fines, or that this will cost a lot of money. He says, don't worry, this isn't going to cost that much. We can bribe all these people. Two friends of yours from Thebes, Simmias and Cebes, have offered large amounts of money to secure your escape. So don't worry about that. It's not going to be a problem for us. Second argument, where should you go? Don't worry. Crito says he has friends in Thessaly, and they will treat Socrates well if he runs away there. Third argument is, you have children. One of them was still underage, I believe. And if you die, you're taking the easy way. A parent has responsibilities towards his children. He should look after them, give them an education, and if Socrates allows himself to be executed, he won't be able to look after his children. And finally, the last argument is again a reiteration of the previous one about reputation. If we, your friends, shouldn't have let this situation come to this, the trial shouldn't have taken place, the result shouldn't have been what it was, but now, if we don't help you run away, we will get a terrible reputation with posterity. So now begins really the main body, the really meaty part of this dialogue, which is the second exchange, which is a little bit, occupies most of the dialogue, and it's a little bit more philosophical, if you will. So Socrates starts saying, okay, let's talk about this topic, and he starts saying that only if he is persuaded rationally that escaping, that running away is a fair thing, a just thing to do, Δικαιοσύνη, only then will he run away. So he's going to explain an argument, and he starts with some premises that he believes are shared between him and Crito. He says, okay, let's assume one premise first, the one that we've already mentioned. One must respect the opinion of the wise, not the opinion of the many. So he hammers the point. He says, you believe this in the past, I believe this now. And he says, we shouldn't change this opinion just because we're afraid of death. Just because now we're on the verge of execution, we would be like children, like foolish children who talk about anything they want just for entertainment. But when the time comes to really, as they say in English, walk the walk, not only talk the talk, but walk the walk, then you decide that you no longer believe what you said you believed in. So he says, it is not right to change one's opinion because of fear. So the fear of execution shouldn't make you change your opinion. If you still think that the opinion of the wise is better than the opinion of the many, you should stick to that, and you should not worry about the opinions of the many. And he gives two exempla, if you wish. First, the gymnastics pupil. He tells Crito, imagine a student who is training in a gym. Who should he listen to? Whose advice should he pay attention to? His trainer's or somebody else's? It's obviously the trainer, who is the person who knows about how to get into good shape. And then he makes it a little bit more abstract, and he says, if people give you advice that leads to your body becoming ill, sick, spoiled, wouldn't it be stupid to listen to their advice? Even more so, if the advice that was given was poison to the mind, it deteriorated your mind, wouldn't it be stupid to pay attention to these people? So you shouldn't care what other people think is bad. You should care about what you know, and what the wise know is bad. So connected with this previous point, the second of the premises of Socrates is that only the good life is worth living. So this hammers the point that life in itself is not an end, and therefore the loss of life cannot be the worst thing to happen to a human. The worst thing that can happen to a human is to stop living the good life, which then becomes a fate worse than death. What the good life is expounded in many Socratic dialogues and many of these books. But at least, it seems in this dialogue for Socrates, it is obeying and doing what one feels is good, and always searching for the good. Okay, so first, Socrates, as we say, exposed these two principles, these two premises that he supposes Crito accepts as well. Only the good life is worth living, and we shouldn't pay attention to opinions just because they're majority opinions. So very quickly he dispatches the four of Crito's arguments. So he says, all of those arguments that you've just stated before, the reputation of my friends, my children's education, my well-being in Thessaly, the cheapness of being able to escape, all these things only follow the opinions of the many. The many think that life is the most valuable thing, that one should run away from death at whatever cost, that one should worry about material well-being in exile, that one should have a good reputation. These things are only based not on reason, but on the opinions of the many. And Socrates is not going to be swayed by any argument based on the opinions of the many. He's only going to be swayed, if at all, by rational argumentation. Now here, Socrates introduces a third premise. And this is an interesting one, because he self-consciously assumes and manifests that he is aware that this premise might not be accepted by Crito. And definitely it is not accepted by a lot of people, perhaps by the many who have wrong ideas about everything. But anyway, Socrates clearly underlines that this premise is a bit more problematic. And he says to Crito, do you agree with me on this or not? Because some people agree with this, some people don't. It's impossible to negotiate between one or the other. They're two very strong positions. And the third premise is that one should never repay evil with evil. This sounds very Christian, and this happens a lot with these early Platonic dialogues, where the figure of Socrates feels very much like a philosophical Jesus. And there are many parallelisms: the suffering of the innocent wise man, the persecution of the conservative establishment, the willingness to accept death and to sacrifice himself, part of the moral message. So, Socrates is a bit like a philosophical Jesus, at least as he appears in Plato's dialogues. And this sounds, a very Christian idea. You should never repay evil with evil. That is, evil is never justified. A person who acts in this world, who strives for the good, is not authorized to respond with evil only because he has received evil, mistreatment from another person. Now, as I said, Socrates recognizes that this is a minority and probably a controversial opinion. That is, most Greeks, most Athenians wouldn't have agreed with this. They would have said, no. This, reminds us, the Talionic eye for an eye of the Bible. Yeah? Things have to be justice. Δικαιοσύνη consists on balancing out evil done to oneself with evil that one is able to do to the first evil causer, as a way of cosmic balancing the respective evils. But Socrates says, no, I don't think that one should ever repay evil with evil. One should always do what one thinks is right. Never mind what other people do. Okay, and from this, after all these premises have been accepted, we get, as it were, to the conclusion. The implied conclusion is that, based on these premises, evidently, it is not fair to run away from justice. Yeah. Why? Well, Socrates, in the last part of his dialogue, introduces a character. He says to Crito, imagine the rules of the city took human shape and came here and came to talk to me and to interrogate me about my plans for running away if I were to listen to you and to decide that, okay, let me go, let me run away. Well, then the laws would appear and they would scold Socrates and tell him, hey, why are you trying to destroy us? So the laws speaking through Socrates make the following 5 points to hammer down the idea that Socrates must not run away. So the first argument that the laws make is that a state can only subsist if individuals have to obey its laws. So this is pretty commonsensical, but you really have to think about this. A community, a state, a society, whether it be a Greek polis or a modern nation, can only subsist if its laws are respected. I mean, if everybody starts deciding that they get a free out of jail card in different situations, then the whole system would collapse. So you might feel that a law is unfair. You might feel that you should be exempted from it. But you can't be. If everybody started doing that, the state would collapse. It would be chaos. So society has to exist through the subordination of the individuals to the law. Subordination means that they must obey the law and that they must be punished if they break the law. Now, the second argument that the laws make is that living in a society, living in a city-state, implies accepting, so what we could call, anticipating the 18th century developments in philosophy and in Western thought, living in society implies assuming a social contract. So the law says, you exist because of the laws and because of our state. The laws of our state allowed your parents, who were both citizens, to get married and to have children. It says, when you complain that you don't like the laws now, that they affect you or that they punish you, are you against all the laws? Are you against the laws that allowed you to be born? Furthermore, the state establishes some guidelines on the education of children and expects parents to educate them. And the laws say, are you against that? Are you against the laws when they educated you, when they gave you an upbringing? Moreover, the laws say, okay, not only are you in debt to us, because you wouldn't exist without us, your parents wouldn't have made you, you wouldn't have been educated, Not only this, once you're an adult, if you want to leave, if you're unhappy with the laws of Athens, with the laws of our society, you could leave. It's perfectly legal. You can keep your property in the city. You can go away and start another city. So if you're not happy with the laws of a state, you should try to persuade through your words the laws in the state that they're wrong. If you can persuade them to change good, if you can't, you should abide by them, or you should leave the city. It's perfectly legitimate. Related to this, the laws also say, don't think, Socrates, that our relationship is an equals relationship. We are the laws of the state. Our relationship with you is asymmetrical. Individuals are subordinate to the state and to the laws of the state, just like children are subordinate to parents and slaves to slave masters. So, just as children cannot expect to avenge the punishments that their parents bestow on them, neither should an individual try to get his revenge on the state, even if he disagrees with the laws, even if he feels that he has been treated unjustly. They're not on equal ground, individual and laws. The laws make another strong argument, specifically for Socrates. They say, and you especially, out of all men, should respect the laws and not leave, because you've loved the city more than anyone. You've lived in this city all of your life. You've only left it once, very briefly, to go to the Isthmian Games, and a couple of other times when you were serving in the army, doing your duty. Just as in the army, you mustn't shirk, and you must do your duty, so must you do it now in the court and remain here. You've shown a special love and loyalty to the city. You've had children here. When you were being tried for impiety, and after you had been found guilty, you could have asked for exile. The city would have granted you your right to go away then, but not now. You said then, quite arrogantly, that you'd rather die than leave the city. So were you lying then? Will you stick to your word? Finally, as if it were as an afterthought, the laws really refute Crito's arguments, especially the ones related to living abroad and children. So as for living abroad, the laws say, if you break the law, if you're a lawbreaker, you won't be able to go to well-ordered states as an exile and expect to be well received there, because they will know you as a criminal who broke the law. And you will have to go into vile places, probably Thessaly, which was a disordered and chaotic place at this time, where you will live a vile life, having to entertain other people who are vile as well, and who will only be friendly towards you as long as they're in the mood. You won't be living the good life that we talked about before, the life of the philosopher, the life of the mind. No. You will be living, barely eking out a miserable existence at the mercy of other people's whims. As for your children, it makes no point to talk about looking after children. If Socrates runs away, he will either take his children with him or leave them behind. If he takes them with him, he is depriving them of the Athenian citizenship that Socrates so conspicuously enjoyed and appreciated. If he were to leave them behind, it wouldn't matter if he is alive or dead, because he wouldn't be able to teach them and help them. And his friends wouldn't help them more if he was in Thessaly than they would if he was in Hades, death. The last argument the laws make is that in the other world, Socrates, if he dies not because of the fault of the laws, but because of the fault of men, he will be honored as a sufferer, not a doer of evil, whereas the laws of hell wouldn't take kindly to him as a lawbreaker. So based on all of this, Socrates says, so this is what the laws would say, and they are playing a tune that I find difficult not to follow. I would be seduced by their musical tune, forced to obey. And this is what I think on the topic, Crito. If you can think of other things you want to say to try to persuade me, tell me, but I don't think I will be persuaded. And so the dialogue ends. Socrates has very clearly stated that he will not run away from death. So a very interesting, rather short but very intense dialogue with many interesting ideas that would be debated during the following centuries. Very interesting one, the relationship of an individual to the state, the way in which it is explained through the laws in this dialogue sounds distinctly authoritarian to our modern democratic sensibilities. But again, democracy is problematized repeatedly in this dialogue. The opinion of the many, and also the submissiveness or the level of submissiveness that an individual has within the state. Where is the space in a city-state for the loyal opposition? So if you disagree with the laws, if the only chances you are given are trying to persuade, not being successful, going away, it leaves very little sphere for a loyal opposition towards policies that you think are endangering the state and the society. But anyway, very interesting dialogue.